Welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. This is a joint webinar between the APM Governance SIG and the APM Enabling Change SIG, specific interest groups. It is called Cracking the Code of Strategic Misrepresentation, Revealing Bias in Project Success. And we thank you for your engagement in this anonymous audience polling. This slide is just to show you the 3 different steps that we have had so far. You have currently joined us for our 3rd event. The first one was in March, and it was all about exploring the problem. I had an event about defining what strategic misrepresentation is. And today you are joining us about bringing it together and talking about the data. And I think it is about time to introduce our presenters for the day. So we have representation from our 2 specific interest groups, and they have kindly joined us on screen now.
Good morning. Hello, everyone.
So we have our host here.
Yep, I'll introduce myself then briefly. Hello, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon from wherever you are in the world. My name is Greg Krawczyk, and I am a long-time APM volunteer, currently with the Governance Sigma Chartered Project Manager. I'm a strategic PMO manager in my day job, and I believe good governance can unlock the power of data. And I'm joined here today with Mark.
Good morning, good afternoon, we've established everyone. So my name's Mark and I'm director of a company called Applied Change. As you can probably see from our backdrop here, as we're running this event from the Applied Change offices. So I've had 25 years or more experience in change and transformation, and that includes some of the fastest paced transformations in history. And as part of what I'm doing with the APM, I'm working closely with the Enabling Change SIG, or I'm a key part of the Enabling Change SIG. So we are looking at people, behaviours and what goes on to enable change.
Great, thank you, Mark. Together today, we're going on an odyssey into the world of strategic misrepresentation. And we're going to start with that question, what is it? Why is it important? Mark's then going to talk to why do people misrepresent. We're going to help you unlock that code, the why, the what, the where, the when, the how, and the who. We're going to talk about where we can go next as a group. We are going to try and finish it, well, we are going to finish at 1 o'clock. There will be around about 10-15 minutes for Q&A. So, shall we get started? Mark, first slide, over to you.
Okay, so what is strategic misrepresentation? Well, at the first event, we identified a number of areas essentially which relate to the fact that we start off in a project or program with the best of intentions, and for various reasons end up somehow distorting the facts. And so looking at the last event, defined a strategic misrepresentation. And we have a question. So how many projects achieve the golden 3, if you would like to say, from a project management point of view, on time, on budget, and deliver the benefits they were set out to achieve? What percentage, I should say. So you'll see, hopefully you can see Menti. So if you could give your view on what you think that number looks like. So on time, on budget, and delivers the benefits they set out to.
So Mark, everyone's already should be in Menti now. If you're not, I'm going to give you about 20 seconds. There's going to be lots of questions like this today. So please do fill out Menti meter question. Mark, let's look at the results. They're coming in thick and fast.
Excellent. So the leader at the moment is 5 to 10%. It's a very low number, isn't it?
Well, 9 seconds to go, Mark. What do you think? Should we reveal the real answer?
Let's have a little look. Yeah, so I think we're 5 to 10%, yeah. Wouldn't that be great? So this is based on some research that was done, that's been done recently. But now one of the most comprehensive databases of projects that exists anywhere in the world, as far as we are aware of. And up to this point, we had the oft-quoted McKinsey figures, Standish figures, all talking around a 30% success rate, which we already thought was depressing. And yet, what we're seeing here is something far more stark. What we're actually seeing, if you look on the right here, so on budget or better, only 47.9% of projects. On budget and on time, only 8.5% of projects. When you add in benefits as well, that number drops significantly to 0.5%.
Stark figures, Mark, and for those of you that are seeing this for the first time, I'm guessing this will resonate with you. You may find it unbelievable. At the database, I think last time I saw it was 16,000 projects, including over 5,000 IT projects. I think the term coined is by Bent, the iron law, isn't it? Over cost, under budget, time and time again. So
you may also want to just take a look at the figure on the top there, and that is really interesting, which is that the mean budget overrun, for those of you who are statistically minded, is 73%. Now keep in mind that the average contingency that we're running at is somewhere between 10 and 20%. Looking at your own budgets, you can come up with an answer, but I'm guessing that most of you don't have 73% as your contingency. Yeah? When you look at technology specifically, and then you look at the long tail relating to this, that number goes up to a much even kind of more depressing figure of 443%. So the message there is when they go wrong, when they go bad, they go very bad.
Yeah, I think one thing to rest assured of, things will not go as planned. And I always say to my clients or anyone who will listen, show me a project that does deliver time, cost, and benefits, and I'll show you a flying cow. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about what strategic misrepresentation is, just in a couple of minutes. And
I'm glad you're going to do that, Greg, because you landed that with me earlier. So yeah, good stuff.
We'll come back with a few examples. So to those who are APM members, to those that are joining as guests, to those who I know, we've got what many of us believe is a really fiendishly difficult code to crack in strategic misrepresentation. I'll give you some reasons why we think that. What we're talking about here is not optimism bias. For any of you that are familiar with the works of Kahneman and Tversky, Thinking Fast and Slow, behavioral economics and the Nobel-winning prize work there, or Ben Flubier, who I'll come back to, we're not talking about those optimism biases, anchoring biases, to a degree planning fallacies. No, we're not talking about that here. We are talking about conscious deception. I'm going to roll a few things into this today. It includes strategic misrepresentation, which is a bias. We all have a bias towards misrepresenting data and information to suit our own strategic purpose. I'll give you a few examples of where this kicks in. Let's talk about Ben Flubier. I think we've got his book behind us, if you can see it, the orange one. How Big Things Get Done. Ben has been publishing work on this for decades. I think the earliest reference to strategic misrepresentation was back in the 1970s. It came more to prominence in the 90s and most recently in the last 10 years. In 2021, Ben published a paper called The Top 10 Behavioral Biases in Project Management. Yes, you guessed it. Strategic misrepresentation was at the top. Some would say one of the greatest contributors to failing project success rates. I'll quickly read out a definition for you that came from Benson and others. Strategic misrepresentation is the tendency to deliberately and systematically distort or misstate information for your strategic purpose. A few examples. The closer you get to politicians, sorry for those of you that are, anyone here that's an executive director or a sponsor, you are a leading cause of strategic misrepresentation. You are a leading cause of one of the primary failure modes in projects. And indeed, the closer you get to a big project that has that exposure, the more prevalent strategic misrepresentation becomes above and beyond the systematic biases and heuristics that we all have that mean we can't do optimism bias very well forecasting. In fact, the greater the strategic misrepresentation impact also influences greater optimism bias. You get politicians saying they want something, people become more optimistic, they'll gravitate towards that power bias. I hope you agree that it's not any small feat to try and address what many would call deception, what some and I would call lying. But here's a question for all of us. How do we stop people fudging the numbers? How do we stop people misrepresenting data to achieve their own purpose? If you only remember one thing today, it's this. The closer your project gets to executives and senior directors and politicians, the greater the likelihood is that strategic misrepresentation will be a primary failure mode on the project. So, Mark, we're going to go over to you now to talk about some examples to really bring this to life, which is where Mark can bring his skills to the fore. So, Mark, over to you.
So hopefully you can see on screen there are three images, three rather famous images. So we have Sydney Opera House, we have Terminal 5, we have the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, and we have the Empire State Building. So I'm just going to ask you to answer the question which is on the screen here, which is which one of those is the odd one out? So I'm going to give you, how long are we going to give?
30 seconds, Mark.
30 seconds, yeah. Just have a little vote. Which one is the odd one out?
So, Mark, I'm doing the test now. Results are hidden, Mark, so we can reveal those when you're ready.
Fantastic. Great. Will you let me know when we're good?
You've got lots of results coming in already, Mark. Seem to have a sticky number here. It's reading a bit lower on my screen than the time. So let's have a look, see what's coming through, shall we, Mark?
Okay. Interesting. Interesting. So when that, we're going to wait for the end?
I think we've had about 125 coming in, Mark.
That's not bad.
So about half the audience.
People. Oh, about half, sorry.
Yeah, we do encourage everyone to contribute.
Yeah, give them a few more seconds.
We'll keep it open.
Excellent. Thank you all. Thank you. Right. So I'm going to take you back in time a little bit to April 1966. What a year that was, eh? It's a sunny day, beautiful sunny day. And Jörn and his family are getting on a plane. Should be exciting, should be fun, especially back then to get on a plane, right? Except it wasn't. That's not what Jörn was feeling. Jörn was reflecting on the fact that this was probably the last time he would ever return to this country, he and his family. So let's roll back a little bit further to another story. It's 1959, and a state politician is coming to the end of his tenure, and sadly to the end of his life too, as he has cancer. He's done a good job. He's changed a few things in the state, implemented some great new initiatives, but he didn't have anything that he felt he would truly be remembered by. He needed a statement. Things hadn't been going so well economically, and many people were struggling. Some were even critical of the local politicians. So he needed something that was going to lift people as well. So not only a legacy for himself, but also a legacy for the area. Big statement. The problem was he was struggling because the rest of his party weren't really getting on board. They saw this as a big waste of money. They saw it as a folly. So how could he convince them? How could he convince them to go along? So what he ended up doing was, of course, playing down the actual costs, playing up the likelihood of success, Yeah. The other thing he did was made sure that he got enough momentum to get digging, to create a big hole in the ground, to get the diggers, to get the people working in a big prominent area. Very visible statement. One that would be really hard to reverse, one that would be really hard to stop once it got going. Be very visible, politically sensitive stop. So how do you think that will go? Do you think this is going to go well? Yeah. Anybody recognize something similar in your world? That sense of optimism, enthusiasm from the top. Maybe some skepticism elsewhere. Yeah. And yet they plow on. And yet we all plow on. We follow. Yeah. So how do you think it will go? Well, I'll tell you how it went. What was a £7 million budget ended up being 102 million. What should have been done in 4 years ended up taking 14. And to answer the question on screen, the topic I'm talking about here, the building I'm talking about here, is the Sydney Opera House. And what's really ironic in all of this is that even today, it's acoustically unsuited to opera.
Well, Mark, having been to the Opera House, I can attest to the fact that it did achieve one of its objectives, which was to be an iconic harbourside venue. But boy, did it cost a lot, and boy, did it take a long time. We were talking about this earlier, when we were like, what if, with the others, like you rightly said, they actually had worked out accurately how much it was going to cost, how long it was taking. It would have happened faster, it would have happened cheaper.
So to answer the question, I suppose, which we should do, which is the odd one out, Sydney Opera House, and why is it the odd one out? Because it's the only one of those 4 that didn't come in on time, on budget, and deliver its stated benefits or more. All other 3 were exactly in that space.
Well, Mark, to move us on to the next one, I can do this one really quickly, but I've got another example for you. And it's not just big construction. Yes, most of the case studies come from there because that's where the money is, that's where the research happens. But this happens everywhere. I see it all the time. I'm sure you do too. Connect what we're talking about here to your area of work. Here's a story for you. I was chatting to a colleague, and she was telling me how she had this brilliant idea. And she'd been trying for months to get it through the system. I've been talking to her about it throughout, but she couldn't. The prioritization wasn't happening. The decision-making frameworks weren't there. She was growing increasingly frustrated. And this thing was low cost. It was high impact. It was the type of project any exec should see wanting to happen. And it dawned on me. I had this light bulb moment in my head. Crikey, what she probably needs to do is strategically misrepresent and pull this thing, a project that would get it through the system, and then change it, introduce change, get that spade in the ground, the proverbial spade in the ground, to allow this technology project to proceed. And I checked myself there. And, Mark and I had a chat about it, and we challenged the thinking. Actually, sometimes people misrepresent for the right reasons. Ethics. Who's to decide what's right and wrong? It's a complex, knotty issue. Cracking this code is not going to be easy. Mark, let's go to the next one, shall we? Pick up why people misrepresent.
So go on, let's test the water here. What do you think? Why do people misrepresent? And remember, we're not talking here, as Greg pointed out, we're not talking here about the sort of the natural biases we all have to make a mistake in the way we present information. This is the active, willful misrepresentation of facts with a specific purpose.
It's a challenging topic, isn't it? Lying. Really, it's fundamentally what it's about. So, people may differentiate between strategic misrepresentation and lying. They both form a part of deception. It's a conscious decision, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do we talk about that? We all know it's happening. Everyone knows things are getting labelled. Spades going in the ground. But why? Should we crack open this nut, Mark, and see what's coming through?
Okay. Personal financial gain, ambition.
I can pause it if that's it.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Just scan a few. Protecting that position, job, yeah, we see that, don't we? Saving face, that's a big one. Yeah, wanting the project to progress, as we talked about earlier. Yeah, spot on. Pride, yeah, pride's coming up a few times. Fear of addressing reality, yes. Yeah, run out of other options, that's a great one. The only way to get things done, yeah. Ego. Anybody see egos theory, maybe, in the odd project or program? Yeah. Not exposing bad news.
Some good responses there, Mark.
Great, really good, thank you.
Okay, let's go to the next slide.
Yeah.
All right, bear with me, Connor. Okay.
So having looked at this, I mean, I'm a big fan of keeping it simple. And what I've tried to do here is to distill this down into the big four that I like to think of, right? And coincidentally, they all start with P because I love alliteration. Hopefully make it easy to remember. Yeah. So why do people misrepresent? Well, the first one is politics, political bias, let's say. And this involves the slanting of the facts to suit one's own political agenda. And by that, I mean, affiliations we're part of. That could be a small p politics or a big P politics. So it could be our own political party's agenda, strategic kind of direction that we're trying to go in, or within an organization, it could be that particular group of people you're furthering their agenda. So political bias essentially is slanting the fact to achieve whatever the strategic bias is. So the next one is power. And we should never underestimate the impact of authority. Often we end up doing things because those people that we are seen to be sort of reporting to or have power, we perceive have power over this, can exert a phenomenal influence. This comes from childhood, okay? We're looking up to teachers, to parents, to positions of authority such as police, even doctors, right? We have this inbuilt sense that if they say it, then we have to go along with it, yeah? Stanley Milgram, for those of you who want to take a deeper look at this, did some fascinating experiments in the 1960s, looking at the effect, if you like, the impact of influence and how far you can take it. Yeah? So the next one is personal. Well, I don't need to, I'm sure, tell any of you that we're all driven by our own personal agendas first and foremost. And it might not just be individual, okay? It could be that to protect our family, to protect our peers, to protect those immediately around us if we believe that they're in any way threatened, okay? So we will put personal interest at the core before anything else, at least at an emotional level. And the last one is peers. What do I mean by peers? Well, what I'm talking about here is peer pressure, essentially, because one of the psychological factors about being human is that it's generally in our interest to conform, yeah? If you think about cancel culture and various other things, when we feel that we're on the outside, it feels horrible. And that goes back to nature hundreds of thousands of years ago, where if we were outside the tribe, this became very quickly life-threatening. So we have this inbuilt need to conform to the group. And if the group is going one way and we're feeling that we don't agree with it, the tendency is, and again, there's been some fascinating experiments here, the different line experiments. For those of you who want to know more, hit me up and I'll share with you. But yeah, where we can actually influence the way people think because of the group norms. So peer pressure is another one.
Thank you, Mark. And certainly many of them resonate with me. The personal one is something we talk about a lot, isn't it? We have done over the last 6 to 9 months. Individual motivators. So there are many reasons for why this is a fiendishly challenging code to crack. And that leaves it to me now to unpick where we've got to. Mark and I have taken us on the journey of the what and the why. And like any good Trojan horse on an odyssey, it's led us into the camp of how, and not just the how, also the who and the when. We'll come on to the where we go next later. So the journey we're going to go on now is one of, we do have a problem. We know that from our event 1, where we surveyed 180 people, and they told us that they consider strategic misrepresentation to be a really big issue. But when asked about what do they know about what to do about it, they strongly agreed that they didn't know what to do. There was no framework in place. And certainly I feel that, I know Mark, you do, and many of us do.
Yeah.
But what if we had a solution to that, a framework we could use, something we could refer to that points us in the right direction? Well, we're terrible at delivering projects successfully. The stats already show us that. The when is a key question here, something we explored in event 2 in person in London. We had a full house at the last event in May. And the right time, interventions at the right time came out. You can probably guess when. Yes, the big one is your investment decision. Some would call that the business case stage. In other organizations, maybe you're from one, I know I've been there many times, where you don't have the ability to shut down a project once it's started. That's never happened before. When a project starts, it sees its way through. If you're in that camp, and many of us are, your investment decision is the day the project starts. So you really need to think about when in the project lifecycle you can stop the project, and that's a key focal point, but it's not the only one. There'll be many of you here that maybe aren't involved at the business case stage. Think about other key decisions. The procurement decision. Look at Crossrail. Go live decision. There are many, many key decision points, but it's picking those focal points, namely decisions about investment, that's key. In the last event, we also explored the who. We've already talked about that quite a bit today. You won't be surprised to know, yes, again, it's the sponsors. If you are joining us and you are a sponsor, you're a significant contributor here as a politicians, and ultimately a parent board of an organisation is the ultimate accountable entity. But we all share responsibility, from project managers to program managers, project controls, or change managers, Mark or PMO, mine. We all have a part to play in preventing this key failure mode from occurring.
And actually, if I could just pick up on that point, it just brings to mind the experience of the Toyota manufacturing in the 80s. And one of the things that they instilled, was that everybody has a part to play in quality. It's kind of sounding familiar, right? And in fact, what they had is a red cord that was accessible by anybody in the plant. And anybody in the plant, at any time, if they saw something going off the rails, could pull the red cord, stop the line completely. Yeah, they had the authority. Everybody had the authority. In fact, they were encouraged to do so from senior management. They wanted that line stopped. They wanted the problem solving before the production continued, because they recognised that avoided making cars wrong. Yeah, it avoided waste and cost. Okay, it's kind of sounding, as we were talking, that parallel is really standing out for me, and hopefully for you too.
We've spoken about what we can learn from different industries, Mark. We're going to come back to that later, but certainly, music industry, Mark, you have a lot of prior experience in manufacturing. How different industries deal with strategic misrepresentation, and there's a lot we can learn as a profession. So the how. We have had 2 events on this. We've had some lively debates on LinkedIn. I am going to stand here now and give you that ambrosia. You're about to get those sunlit uplands. That chest is going to be opened to a world of pearls of imagination. I'm lying to you now. I'm misrepresenting the truth. I'm being deceptive. I can't give you that answer because it doesn't exist. It is a fiendishly difficult code. To be frank, not many people do have a solution. We can look to the likes of Ben Fluvier and others who have published on the topic. But when, and we know this, we survey project managers, the general strong response is they're not quite sure what to do about it. So the message isn't getting through. We don't have that societal culture, if I can call it. That's probably an overly used word. But what I can give you now is some of the things that we're going to talk about today. We're going to do a deep dive into these. So the 5 areas we've broken it down to so far: define and measure, eliminate, provide independent assurance, possibly. How can we reduce it? If you're seeing a theme here around risk management terminology, it's where we've landed. Transparency and oversight is going to be key. What about fallback plan? How do you, when these issues arise, when things hit the fan, what's your fallback plan? How can you prevent it? and crucially, and probably the most important, or a huge one that came out last time, ethics and culture. So I'm going to do a quick tour now through these. So please feel free to take notes as we go through. There is a previous blog that's been created that captures a lot of this information. It's this kind of thing that we hope will be teased out in years ahead. So fasten up your belts, put your tray tables up. We are voyaging on the odyssey of how to crack the code of strategic misrepresentation. First up is focusing on project managers. So I'm going to try and give you some specific advice, PMs, as I know most of you will be in the room. A lot of what we're talking about here actually is geared towards organizations, but it's important that we all play a part. So project managers, think about utilizing the identification tools for strategic misrepresentation. Talk to your team, learn lessons, read into it, see what you can do. How can you educate your sponsor? I have to leave in here because this is the only way to do it.
And again, just sort of picking up on that, think about the analogy we used earlier about the Toyota production line. They had a way of seeing when things were going wrong. Yeah, so that's what we're trying to do in project management terms. Yep. PMs is to be able to identify where there's likely to be a problem and then call it. Yeah.
If you are a CXO, if you're a head of projects, if you're a PMO manager, if you're a member of a board or a COO, points 2 and 3 on all of these 5 slides are for you more. Think about categorizing the types of strategic misrepresentation. Is it deception? Is it tardiness? How can you develop data-led measures for these things? How can you promote data transparency within the organization? If you want a really advanced idea, here we go for those of you that are already doing a lot in this space, I know many of you are, implement advanced AI algorithms to give you that Sauron unblinking eye of strategic misrepresentation. Honesty and truth, how do you measure that? Think about that. That's a challenging question. Let me know if you have the answer. Okay, we're going to rattle through these really quickly now. Let's talk about, can we eliminate strategic misrepresentation? Mark, I think it's an obvious no. We can't eliminate it. We haven't discussed it.
Well, the fundamentals, of course, will remain. It's a bit like trying to stop your kids from lying, right? If it's in their interest, they'll do it. And that's where we often end up. So we need to have these frameworks in place to make it less likely.
But where we've got to after several meetings, a few hundred of us attendees, we've got to calling it eliminate anyway. Providing independent assurance. What does that look like? If you're a project manager, use the tools that you know are going to shortcut bias. Historical information is one. RCF, reference class forecast. We talked about that a lot in event 1. Creating data-enabled and designed projects is key. Make sure you use the data and challenge bias initially on this one. So if you are a CXO, COO, PMO, if you're responsible for an organization that does projects, a head of projects, think about requiring independent assurance to keep business case estimates and forecasts away from the project managers. Yes, keep that data away from them. Keep the data in a common environment. I think it comes further down, but another piece of advice is separate your project manager from your sponsor. That's a really, really strong one as well. Go further, get independent data oversight committee. Think about creating a committee that oversees how you use data, and look at things like blockchain technology. There you go, some really advancements coming up. Okay, transparency and oversight. How do we ensure that transparency is there all the time? Hyper-transparency, I think, is where we're going with this. If you are a PM, think about collaborating with your data governance, your data custodian, anyone that's got that data. If you don't have access to that data, a piece of advice from me, have a look at the government's Green Book, which is how the Treasury does finance appraisals. Supplement on optimism bias, that's helped me in my earlier career, so have a look at that. All the works of Oxford University, take their stats. CXOs, COOs, etc. Look at establishing data governance structure and trying to automate your processes for using that data to inform decision making. And form an audit and steering committee. If you really want to go fast, go look at machine learning for real-time assessment and having public-facing dashboards to show how you use data. Okay, fallback, governance and accountability. If you are a PM, a bit of advice for you, engage your project board on this, your program board, educate your sponsor, have the conversations about how are we making the right decisions. Decision hygiene is a big term that's used. CXOs, COOs, project leads, etc. Think about linking your sponsor bonuses to data transparency and ethics. Think about suing the forecasters, something that's been talked about. How do you give them skin in the game? Conduct independent data quality reviews. Require decision logs linked to data. If you really want to go far, think about implementing predictive analytics to identify trends. And again, back to AI and machine learning, risk assessment tools as well. Finally, and many would argue the most important, culture, ethics. We want PMs to promote the ethical use of data. COOs, CXOs, etc. You need to think about improving data literacy, data policies, training, circulate case studies, support a whistleblowing procedure that fosters a positive and ethical culture. Back to Toyota's red line, don't shoot the messenger. And finally, think about ethical use of data audits.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that,
Mark.
again, it's there's a saying, as you're probably all very familiar with, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. If the culture's not right, it becomes very, very hard to police. Okay, if you work the culture, you need less emphasis on the controls because people will tend to do what is the right thing. And going back to the Toyota scenario, the only reason people felt they could pull the red cord is because they genuinely felt the culture supported them and they were empowered to do so. Because otherwise, it wouldn't have mattered how many red cords there were. Nobody would have pulled it if they felt that they were going to, in some way, be worse off as a result. In other words, the sort of power, if you like, or the impact that would come down on them. And in project management, as we all know, even just pulling the red cord, which is flipping the status report red, many of us know what that looks like.
Yeah. Well, I've seen many watermelons and been guilty myself of going from red to green in my life. Crossrail's the greatest recent example, isn't it, Mark? So I want to just ask you a rhetorical question. From what you've heard so far, ask yourself, am I feeling this? We've asked that question before. Many people do. Most do, going back to statistics. Those of you that aren't sure, I hope you'll agree that there's something to this. Now, a few of us have met after the last couple of groups, and we've been thinking about how do we change society. That's the APM's mission. And we looked at it from a few angles. This is just a bit of fun now. I don't actually know if this is going to work. I didn't show you this, Mark. So as a group, we have come together, a few of us as a group. I'm going to share a mission with you in a minute. But there's more that we can do, because as what we're going to land on now, individuals, we all are feeling this. But together, we can't do that much. Let's be honest. We are 250 people here we go today. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon from Aylesworth. But as individuals, we can make things happen. But as a group, when we come together, we can really make something happen. What we concluded we can really, really make something happen is when we don't just get together as a group or individuals. We get together as a profession. And with the Association for Project Management as our stalwart and our umbrella here to help us through that journey, we believe that with the APM together as volunteers and members, we can make societal change happen because, well, I'm going to speak frankly, damn it, we are change managers. We make change happen in the world. That is our job. So if we can't make societal change happen, well, the world's got a problem. And
I think it's very easy as individuals to think we don't have the power, and then you only got to look back in history to people like Nelson Mandela, to Gandhi, to Rosa Parks, who with one act of just not moving from a seat on the bus sent ripples through society. So we can make a difference.
One of my favourite quotes came out in the Young Conference we did a few years ago, Mark, was back to Margaret Mead, which is never underestimate the power of small groups to change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. She was, I think she studied human behaviour and psychology in major groups. So speaking of groups, a small group of us, 5 to 10, have formed over the last few meetings, and we came up with a name for what we're trying to do here, which is to create awareness within the profession, to draw inspiration from others and create best practice to help society eliminate strategic misrepresentation projects. If you think that's broad, well, look at the APM vision. It is about changing societal perceptions, something that does resonate with many of us. Now, we spoke about how to deliver that change. It's no mean feat. Right? This is not an easy thing to do, and you shouldn't rush it. That's a certain thing. So we discussed that you'd probably call this a transformation program. not going to get into whether or not you'd call it a portfolio at this stage. We talked about, okay, well, if it is a transformation program in the APM world, that starts with the concept stage. And then our thinking went to, what does concept stage start with? Well, does any project start with? A mandate. Call it what you will. Something that sets out the objective. So I've got another question for you. I think maybe this is one of my first questions today. I want you to imagine that we're trying to get sponsorship now for this. And you are an APM executive, as we're going to need to get the APM on board. And you're considering, what is the objective that I'm going to stand behind and champion? What is it that the APM is going to focus on? We talked a bit earlier, maybe I didn't focus in on it enough. If we really zoom in, this is talking about deception. If we zoom out of it, strategic misrepresentation, political bias, all the things Mark talked about. Something that came out of the last event, this is maybe much more talking about ethics, decision hygiene, the correct use of data. So what we're trying to do here is work out what should the objective for what's probably a program around this that we want the APM to work with us and champion and share. What would the objective be? Is it simply to address strategic misrepresentation, or is it something broader that's related? If you could help us, and I know we're taking a minute of 250 of your time, but we think together in this group now, we can come up with some fantastic ideas. And over the next 6 to 9 months, start working with the APM to look at whether or not the APM, this is something they can sponsor. And it could be that there's education, higher education universities that brought in maybe, partnering with universities initially to come up with concepts, and then how do we change? Updating the APM body of knowledge, updating the Green Book, these are all the things that have been discussed. But the key message is, we need to do that together with the APM. So I'm going to leave that up there for a minute and just give everyone 30 seconds to think about that. Thank you. Is the objective to resolve strategic misrepresentation? Is it to be a leader in the area of ethics? Is this about data? Using data in the right way? Is it all of them? We'll keep the timer open. I'm really intrigued to see what we've got coming through. And then we'll move on to Q&A. So let's have a look at what we've got coming through. I think that calls the...
Yeah, change the code of ethics. Yeah.
Quite a few coming through there. Sorry, Mark. Yeah. The red cord. Yeah, that one resonated, Mark. Collaborative R&D vehicle. Yeah, that one resonates with me. It's about working as a community, isn't it? Yeah. And you want to pick up on that, Mark?
Cultural aspects, absolutely. Yeah, as we talked about earlier.
Culture and ethics is coming out a lot here, isn't it? Enhancing data literacy. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm seeing more here around data and ethics and use of it in training and development. Yeah. So there's a lot to be said, which this feeds into. Okay.
And we have fewer responses this time, which is interesting. So if you're sort of catching yourself up with the topic, or kind of still forming your opinion about where to go next, that's okay. So if we leave you with one thing after this, it's that you understand the topic maybe a little bit better than you did before, and that you're able to start forming your thoughts about how we take this forward. For the reasons we've discussed, we believe this is hopefully you do too, that this is a really important topic and well worth some investment in time and focus.
Let's just one last question, if I can, everyone. Thank you, Mark. And we'll come on to Q&A now. But just 30 seconds. Really thinking again for our friends in the Association for Project Management. What do you think it should be the priority of this? Is it a high priority, what you've written down? If you could help us, give us some usable data and insights, which is what this is all about in the end of the day, isn't it? It's moving away from gut feel to having quantitative data, really, to inform our decision making. So if you could help us and give us your opinion now, that would be no doubt very useful in the next 6 to 9 months when we try and formulate this concept. Yeah. Mark, the next slide we're going to go on to is the next steps. So you, by all means, can start talking about that now, and we'll reflect on this data when it comes in.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, one of the things that that we've been mulling over is how to make this, to give this the sort of priority it needs in the coming. So 7.4 out of 10.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. No, just looking at the results coming in here. Yeah, so the 7.75. Yeah, so so essentially, how do we take this forward? And there were some really good ideas that came out of the last event, and one of them, if I'm okay to talk about this now, particularly struck me, which was the code of ethics.
Yeah.
It really it came across loud and clear, because if you consider the medical profession, everybody involved in the medical profession, it has to sign up to a code of conduct. Essentially, it's absolutely key to what they do. My wife's a midwife, and she's had to sign up. And if she goes against that, or does something which is behaviourally against that code of ethics, she can have what they call her PIN taken away. It essentially means she's struck off and cannot practice. Yeah. And that's a pretty hard end point, right? Okay, for anybody who's practicing in any profession. And so there's the question, right? So is it part of the APM's community's job to hold ourselves to that kind of standard? Yeah. So when we sign up, we're not just signing this paper, we're actually signing ourselves up to a particular way of behaving, to a particularly high standard.
I think so, Mark. Yeah. As a chartered project manager, I know that I have to give the appropriate advice, and I'm ethically bound to do that. I signed a charter. Wielded. Lots of people have misrepresented data. More challenging, again, this is a hard code to crack, isn't it, Mark? Because many people are, not project management, they're not members, so they are people in authority. So, Mark, we're going to have to, I think, skip the reflection slide, because I want to get to Q&A and give people some time. That would be good. And keep a weather eye. We're hoping in sort of March, April next year, if all goes well, we'll be able to generate some sponsorship to see how we move this forward. Okay, so coming up next, let's look at the Q&A and questions coming through. And you can still raise questions at any time. Sorry, I should have mentioned that earlier. So, Mark, I'll read them out. How many PMs have been pressurized into painting the wrong picture or hiding stats that don't tell the right to take?
Tail, maybe, I suppose. Yeah.
Mark, quick reflection on
that. Well, I would say that if you think about the project management process on a day-to-day basis, in my experience, you've only got to look, as I said earlier, about status reporting and reporting what is the truth versus what is the truth that you think others are going to want to hear. And there's an awful lot of pressure comes on project managers to do the latter, sadly, whether they actually believe in it or not, because not doing that can, in many cases, as a result of culture, be career limiting, if not career ending.
Thanks, Mark. And we are coming to the end of today's session, everyone. We're going to stick around for a bit of a Q&A now. And for those that do leave in the next few minutes, thank you again for joining us, I should add. Lovely to meet you. Please do connect with Mark and I. You can see our LinkedIn things down there with a QR code or a chat. We'd love to hear from you. And we hope this is helping you on your journey into the odyssey of strategic misrepresentation. And hopefully, unlike DCT, it doesn't take us 10 years to work this out. So we've got quite a few questions coming through. It's a difficult one. Organisations want qualified and experienced PMs, but rarely fund that training. Yeah, you have to have their own agenda and not listen to the PMs. Yeah, I can relate to that, certainly. Here's a thought. Why isn't there a chief projects officer? Most people at a senior level come through from an operations background. They don't necessarily come through a change background. Is there sufficient challenge at the board when it comes to change? Many would argue not. The role of a chief projects officer, a chief transformation officer is growing. But that resonates with me, and I think with all these questions, this needs to be fed into that hopper over the next few years of things that needs to be sorted out. So great question there.
Yeah,
let's go.
And I think more fundamentally, just to pick up on that, it really is about convincing the boards of companies who are not necessarily experienced in the topic of change and project management as to the implications of not of not getting qualified people in that space.
Mark, do you want to take a stab at that one?
Is the risk of strategic misrepresentation increases as leaders get close to the project? What can project managers do about that? Again, it all comes back to motive, really, and who's, what direction are the motives, as we talked about earlier with the Sydney Opera House. So, of course, if those leaders are predisposed to be, in the pet project scenario, as Jim Carhill was in New South Wales back in the 50s, then of course there is that tendency for them to want to influence and thereby put pressures on project managers, much of which will be pressure that the project manager is going to find very, very difficult to offset.
Like a chair of the APM, I think John McGill once said to me and to a group, with whatever power I can, let me empower you to speak truth to power. You have the support of your profession. Okay, let's go to the next one. Asking PMO or subordinates to check misrepresentations from their bosses is a non-starter. We will have to keep a roof over our heads.
And there is a big part of the problem.
I think that's
going back to the personal
90% of it.
Self-interest, peer pressure, authority, all the things we talked about, the P's we talked about earlier. Absolutely right.
It shouldn't be the responsibility. There's a big trust thing here, isn't there?
Yeah.
With the framework of data in place, we have to be trusted to do the right thing, but people will slip up. And it's about capturing that and probably not having too much of a blame culture around it. People do talk about suing people, but gosh, darn it, isn't that going to cause some difficult?
Yeah, and maybe part of the answer, who knows, is some form of anonymous red cord. Yeah, so people can feel empowered to pull that cord without fear of retribution on them.
Great point. Yeah, great question. Okay, Mark, are you happy to stick around for an extra 10 minutes?
Yeah, I'm here. So
okay.
Yeah.
Still got 185 on the call. So great to see you this afternoon. Thank you for spending.
Thank you to all of you for your time. Likewise.
Okay. Mark, is the risk of strategic misrepresentation increases as leaders?
Yes, we've had that one.
Sorry. Okay. All right, let's maybe I need to press enter. Yeah, I think we had that one. Okay. All I do is just catching up. Yeah.
Yeah. There we go.
Yeah, we talked about that one. There we go. I just need to press enter. I'll pick that one up on the stats. So that comes from Oxford University's Global Projects Consultancy arm. There's 16,000 and 0.5%. They went back about 100 years. So I've never been able to see into that data set, truth be told. But probably given the scale of them, I think for the most part, they would have probably had a project manager. But yeah, I agree with you. And that's a part of the challenge, isn't it? We don't have that open, accessible data in a data trust that we can all see and interrogate. And that part of transparency is a significant issue. If we're going to get trust from people, we need transparency. So really, data trust is something that the Project Data Analytics Task Force and James Lee, who I think is on the call with us today, previously spoke about. So, Mark, next one. So we've got 21.
There we go. Benefits measurement is always out of project scope. Often that is true. I mean, and one of the problems we have is that lack of accountability. We said at the beginning it was going to be this, and the time was going to be this, Sydney Opera House again, yeah, and yet at the end it wasn't. It was hugely over, and the tendency is to sort of gloss over it, move on to the next one.
Yeah.
And we, most of us have been around for a little while, will have seen that play out time and time again, especially true where maybe leaders move on to different organizations or that kind of thing. So the first thing they're going to do, and you can't really blame them for doing it because of the way the cultures have worked in many cases, is to claim success and then move on without the rigor.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Friends and colleagues in the benefits world rightly say that I think benefits is probably by far the most important measure on a project or a program. I'm not going to talk about strategic objectives at the portfolio level here, but for delivery, it's all about benefits, isn't it? It's about what we want to get value. That's what we're all here for. Cost and time are constraints, yet those are the ones that get measured far more. Yeah. So I think we have a professional issue around benefits management being underserved greatly. Yeah. So that's a significant issue. Oxford, for what it's worth, when they were measuring benefits for that 0.5%, looked at benefits 1 year after the project. They felt that was a good proxy. So if that helps you, that helped me to know that as well.
And I would argue also that the benefits being measured at the end gives a huge amount of scope for for misrepresentation throughout. The more you can kind of get on the tracking of benefits early on in the project, and whether the things you're delivering are likely to lead to the benefits, and whether something's changed as you go, the less likelihood or the less wriggle room there is for people to cook the books, for want of a better expression. Yeah.
Yeah, AIML. That was a big thing that came out of the last session. I don't know if anyone's really looking at mine, if I'm honest. That wasn't the take I got in that last session where we met in person back in May. But you know, a lot of the conversation gravitated in that direction, using AI as an assistant to call it out, but measuring it is the real challenge. Mark, let's go on to the next one.
That's a great question. So if it's something that's going to cost more but deliver more, is that the wrong answer? And I'd argue that maybe not, but at least with some element of control. So everybody should be on the journey together. Yeah. So if we invest this extra money or this extra time or both, but we're going to get twice the benefit, are we all in agreement that that's the right answer? And it's that piece there that where everybody's on the journey, right? Everybody's taking the decision together, as opposed to one person unilaterally making the decision and essentially hiding the facts of that decision from everyone else. You know, so we're trying to get to the opposite. So great question.
We're being recorded here, aren't we? Different people have different views and benefits, how to measure them. Transport, rail and infrastructure has a pretty bad record of going over cost and over budget and delivering under benefits. Look at a really good example of that happening, the Channel Tunnel. The next time you're at St Pancras, beautiful building, you know, reflect on why only half of the platforms are actually open. So there's a good chance. In fact, yes, statistically speaking, it will. Yeah, you are correct. I don't know if it could be quite bad, but it will be over time, over budget, with statistical certainty.
That's a great question,
Mark.
Yeah, so I mean, you've got cultural considerations. In some countries, what we would call bribery is actually part of doing business. Okay, and so yeah, it isn't a given that everybody comes to this with the same set of core values. And it doesn't mean to say that one's right and one's wrong. They're just different, yeah? And so therefore they will drive different behaviours because they come from the very core of who we are as part of our culture that we identify with. So it really is critically important to get the stated fact, because it doesn't, you know, you get to a point then where you say, well, wherever you come from, whatever your code of ethics, whilst you're in this group and signed up to this code of ethics, these are the expectations of you. So really, really great point, because we shouldn't assume, we shouldn't assume for the reasons set out here.
Just a couple of quick words now. I'm a bit biased, who many of you may know of, wrote a book called Gorilla in the Cockpit, made a case that of the examples Mark gave earlier, those that did succeed, many have tried to replicate that environment, but they've failed. Partly because, for example, Guggenheim, the architect Frank Gehry, used to smoke and swear like a trooper. So that lowered the bar with everyone to have a frank conversation with Frank. So the culture was set for transparency and honesty. And actually, I think the more we talk about it here, the overarching challenge for project success is, yes, we need the quantifiable white box things we can measure in place, including reference class forecasting and historical data, but it's really the culture piece that is the key. Frankly, I think.
And for those of you who know me, that's exactly where we drive from on transformation, because the way people transform is that sense of belief, that sense of it's an emotional engagement. Okay, so whilst you have to have the frameworks in place, it's what really drives people to behave the way they do. It's cracking that code, as it is here. Okay.
Project Artemis, Google, psychological safety. We talk about that at length, could we? Okay, let's go to the next one. How do we hold managers accountable?
Well, I mean, it starts with them holding themselves accountable, of course, as we've talked about. And, you know, then I think it's transparency, you know, whatever forms of transparency we can bring to this.
Red cord, that's going to be a big one.
And, you know, this whole idea of checking in on benefits, okay? So if a benefits case has been overstated or the cost case has been understated at the beginning, then the sooner we can spot this, the better, right? So, you know, if we've got benefit tracking, I mean, there's some great tools out there to compare what we're building with the outcome we're trying to achieve, and therefore the link to the benefits. Yeah, so the more we can bring that in, the greater the transparency on the journey, not at the end. That's way too late. On the journey. Yeah.
It's a systems-based approach, and that's, I think we're talking a lot about systems. There is a systems SIG. It probably needs to be brought in, but yeah, again, this multi-year journey, if we can call it that, hopefully we can, needs to answer these kind of questions and give us that system framework and guidelines that we can follow. Yeah, those are pretty much for all projects. That 0.5% bias towards infrastructure, but does include major IT. It's worth looking at the Oxford research.
Yeah. The work is carried out to time. Yeah. So underspends, will count. I would say most of us, would quite like to have, a tenner back at the end.
But again, cost is a constraint, isn't it, to realise your benefits? So,
I mean, I suppose there is a point here, because if you overstate the cost to too great an extent, so you're always going to come in.
On to the next one, sorry.
So you're overstating the benefits and understating the costs. So if you overstate, so my point was, if you overstate the costs in order to sort of protect yourself later from the fact that it's going to go over budget, we all know that that's not great either. But the other side of it is, of course, if that still works in terms of the benefit case, then that's also what you'd call sensible planning.
Can I take to Mark a quick story? You're probably right. Okay, measuring benefits and disbenefits in this one is challenging. We all know that. HS2 is an example. But just managing any one of the facets, to give you a story from me really quickly from the last event, I recorded where I was working in PFA Manager, the estimated timeframes for how long the project can take at the beginning, the investment decision, and then the actual. And I showed the project managers that delta for their reference class, which was a digital in this case. And I put it to the project manager, actually what you've got is 10% contingency. The data's telling us you need 90. Go back and have a difficult conversation with your sponsor. She did. And they ended up extending some of the critical durations, like increased user engagement, increased testing and commissioning, the areas they knew they were going to fall flat on. So you are right, but I would also encourage people just to look at the individual components. So we had a bit of challenge from Andy Murray, who's the chair of the governance SIG, and he made the case that strategic misrepresentation may be a symptom of an underlying cause. And I think that's what this talks to as well. I think if we go back to my thoughts here, go back to Mark, base needs, in interests. We know there is a base for bias towards misrepresentation of data. Well, at least that's the studies that I've read. If I can recognise it, let's just talk about deception. Maybe we call it that. But you are right to frame the conversation, and I think that takes us back to what objective is there here for the APM, and being clear on that. So yeah, the challenge there is welcome, and a very good point.
I think we're coming back to the essence of the human condition and what it is to be human and what drives us behaviourally. And quite often what we end up with, and the symptom is strategic misrepresentation, was where, if you like, the drivers of basic fundamental drivers of being human are at odds with the needs of the project or program, or the needs of getting it approved, So that wherever that occurs, you can bet your life there's going to be a tendency. So it's really about building that understanding of what is it that really drives us individually, and how can we use that to then get to the outcomes that we're looking for.
There's broader questions to be had, but Rome wasn't built in a day, and these kind of debates are needed, which is why I think there's a whole stage really where academic support is brought in to help us define this, because most of us, there's something to this. I hope you'd agree.
Absolutely, because without that, as many studies have shown, including a huge one by Google, where psychological safety doesn't exist, you will never get to a place that where people can truly come together, if you like, to deliver something fantastic, which is what we're all running for. So it speaks absolutely to this too, is that without that safe environment, nothing else really works, and you've got to put so many controls and checks and balances in. Fact is that for the most part, they won't work.
I think that was Project Aristotle by Google. Go and Google it.
It was.
Head and shoulders, you need psychological safety in place.
Yep.
Okay, let's go for the last one. Any challenges? Lessons learned as regards to any challenges? So in the instances where I've kept reference class data around schedule performance. Getting the project managers to actually use that data and not misrepresent it themselves was a challenge. They reacted negatively to being told what the actual overruns were. They didn't recognize that in themselves. So there's something there about it's happening to other people, boss, not to me. I deliver projects on time. So I found that quite challenging, but I think providing the data and saying this isn't about you, non-judgmentally, this is about learning and reflection and asking the question, what do you make of that data? What are you going to do with that information? But certainly the sponsors are in the same camp. So in that instance, in those instances, I was speaking to the project managers and they were then talking to the sponsors.
Yeah. And I think there are many instances throughout business where we recognise that it's really important to make sure that two people or one person, if you like, can't have too much. We have to stop people being able to run away with the ball, so to speak. Yeah. Back in, as I said, in the early days of manufacturing, one of the things they learned is that quality assurance needed to have a separate reporting line from production, because otherwise what would happen is production managers would put pressure on the quality assurance people to kind of come up with the answers that they wanted to make them look good. Whether they, bad people, great people, actually wasn't the topic. The point is they were driven that way. And so what separation does is stops that even being a possibility. Yeah.
One last thought, Mark, on separation from sponsors and PMs. I'm increasingly of the belief that strong matrix organisations are a positive organisational design model for change in project management. If we look to, for example, Rolls-Royce, to talk about when they recently recognised project management as their third core discipline. And in many organisations now there is a head of project profession. I think that's a strong argument for everyone in the project management workforce to report into the head of the project management profession. It might be that they still are full-time seconded into a particular division, let's say digital technology. But their line management doesn't go to the director for finance or engineering or wherever they are. It goes back to another individual. So I think there's something that more organisations can explore there, if that helps.
Yeah. In fact, Microsoft turned the company around by really pushing that empowerment down into project teams, away from what we would typically see as traditional reporting lines, for exactly that reason. They needed to move fast. And so they went from an organisation which was fairly similar as they'd grown, as Steve Ballmer took hold, looking like something that we would typically recognise today with the very hard reporting lines. And what they found was it just slowed down decision making, and it slowed down, and it created this situation where these sort of toxic behaviours began to creep in.
Maybe Mark, I suggest brings us to the end of our odyssey into strategic misrepresentation. And maybe with that one, Mark, we've finished with an example that is maybe nearly as complex and as challenging as our own, which is how do you take a culture in a major organisation that's not working correctly and straighten it out. And that's hopefully the journey we can go on with the APM with you all in the future. So we're going to call the meeting to an end now. So from me again, Greg Krawczyk, it's been lovely to meet with you today and spend time with you. Mark, anything else you'd like to say?
For me, Mark, too. No, just thank you for joining. And I hope you got, even if you just took one thing away from today, then hopefully we've managed to serve you to that extent. So thank you very much for your attention and for your contribution.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.